I drove to my daughter's mansion in Dallas without telling anyone, carrying a homemade apple pie for my granddaughter's birthday. The moment I slipped through the side gate, I froze. My daughter was on her knees in a servant's uniform, scrubbing the stone courtyard. Her mother-in-law dumped a pitcher of ice water over her head and said coldly, "Finish before dinner. I won't have you dripping on my floors." My daughter whispered, "Yes, ma'am." In that moment, I quietly made a decision, and everyone in that mansion would soon regret what they had done. Friends, the fact that you are here means everything to me. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country are you joining. From today I read every single one. Please be aware some details in this story are fictional, added to bring the message to life. Names and locations are not drawn from any specific person or place, but the truth at the heart of this story is something I believe we all need to hear. I have driven the stretch of Interstate 35 between Corsicana and Dallas more times than I can count. I know every curve, every overpass, every roadside diner that sells decent coffee, and every one that doesn't. I have driven it in rain so thick I couldn't see 20 feet ahead. I have driven it in the dead of night with Linda, asleep in the passenger seat, her head tilted against the window, her breath fogging up the glass just slightly. I know that road the way I know the back of my own hands. But the morning I drove it with a box of apple pie on the passenger seat and a feeling in my chest I couldn't name, that was the drive I will carry with me until my last day. My name is Arthur Miller. I am 65 years old. I spent 40 years as a mechanic in a town small enough that everybody knows your truck before they know your face. I am not a complicated man. I fix things that are broken. I say what I mean. I loved my wife Linda for 31 years, and when she passed 3 years ago from cancer, I kept right on talking to her anyway because some habits are too deep to break. That morning, I woke up at 5 o'clock the way I always do. The house was quiet in that particular way. It gets quiet when you live alone. Not peaceful, quiet, but empty quiet. The kind that has weight to it. I put on the coffee, pulled Linda's recipe card from the wooden box on the counter, and started on the apple pie. Her handwriting was still sharp on that card. Butter, brown, sugar, cinnamon, a pinch of nutmeg. She always said the nutmeg was the secret. I never told anyone else that. While the pie was baking, I walked into the bedroom and looked at the photograph on the dresser. Linda, at 42, standing in front of the old farmhouse her family had owned in Pecos County, squinting into the sun and laughing at something I had said just before I took the picture. I could not remember what I had said anymore. I wished I could. I took the photo out of its frame, folded it carefully, and slid it into the inside pocket of my denim jacket, left side close to the chest. I had been doing that every day since the funeral, and I saw no reason to stop. The pie came out golden at 6:15. I packed it into the white cardboard box Grace had sent me last Christmas. She had written, "For Grandpa's famous pies," on the lid in black marker with a small drawing of a pie that Chloe had added underneath, lopsided and perfect. My chest tightened when I saw that drawing. I pressed my fingers against it for just a moment, then picked up the box and headed for the truck. Before I pulled out of the driveway, I called Pastor James Whitfield. James has been my closest friend for 22 years. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was already up, which meant he had probably been praying since before dawn, which was exactly the kind of man James was. "Are you on the road already?" he asked. "About to be," I said. Just wanted to hear a friendly voice before I got going. James was quiet for just a beat. He knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. "Something's eating at you, Arthur." "Grace hasn't called in 3 weeks," I said. Last time she picked up, she sounded off, like someone was standing right next to her listening to every word. She said she was fine. She said it too fast, James. Way too fast. "Have you called Julian?" The name sat in my mouth like something sour. Julian picks up even less than she does, and when he does, he's friendly in that way that makes the hair on my arms stand up. Too smooth, like a car salesman who already knows you're going to sign. James exhaled slowly. "Trust your gut, Arthur. You've always had good instincts. What does your gut tell you?" I looked out the windshield at the dark sky beginning to turn gray at the edges. "It tells me to drive faster," I said. James said he would pray. I thanked him, hung up, and pulled out at the driveway with the engine of my old F-15, growling the way it always did on cold mornings, deep and reliable like an old dog that might look worn out but would still run all day if you needed it to. The pie on the passenger seat filled the cab with the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar, I tried Grace's phone 3 times before I left the county line, straight to voicemail all 3 times. Her voice on the recording sounded exactly like my daughter, warm and a little breathless, and it made my throat tighten in a way I had not expected. "Hey, you've reached Grace. Leave me a message and I'll call you back soon." Soon. I had been waiting for 3 weeks. By the time the skyline of Dallas appeared on the horizon, my jaw was set and my hands were steady on the wheel. The houses got bigger as I turned off the highway and wound through the streets of Highland Park. Iron fences, stone columns, immaculate hedges that probably cost more to maintain each month than my truck was worth. I turned onto the long private road that led to the Sterling property and pulled up to the gate. I pressed the call button on the intercom. Nothing. I pressed it again. Still nothing. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, the smell of apple pie filling the cab. Then from somewhere behind the house, drifting over the stone wall and the perfectly trimmed magnolia trees, I heard it. A woman's voice, sharp and cold and contemptuous. And under it, the unmistakable sound of water being poured. My hand was on the door handle before I had made any conscious decision to move. I did not go through the front gate. A man who spent 40 years working on engines learned one thing above everything else before you touch anything you look. You look at what is leaking, what is burning, what is bent out of place. You look long enough to understand what you are actually dealing with. Because the worst thing you can do to a broken machine is start pulling parts before you know what went wrong. I parked the F-150 along the stone wall, cut the engine, and walked the perimeter until I found the service entrance on the east side of the property, a narrower gate iron like the rest, but left slightly ajar the way working entrances always are when staff are coming and going. I slipped through it and followed the sound of that voice. What I saw on the other side of the garden wall stopped me where I stood. Grace was on her knees, not kneeling the way you kneel in church with some dignity to it. She was down on both knees on the stone courtyard tiles in the full heat of a Texas July afternoon, wearing a gray uniform 2 sizes too big for her dark hair pulled back tight, her hands wrapped around a scrub brush. The stone beneath her hands was already clean. I could see that from where I stood, but she was scrubbing it anyway, moving in tight circles, her shoulders hunched forward like a woman trying to make herself as small as possible. My daughter, my Grace, who used to climb on the roof of this very truck to watch the Perseid meteor shower every August because she said the sky looked bigger from up high. Standing on the wide stone steps above her, framed by the double doors of the back entrance like she was posing for a portrait, was a woman I had met exactly twice before, Eleanor Sterling, 62 years old, silver hair pulled into a flawless chignon, wearing a white silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. She was holding a large glass pitcher, the kind you put on a dinner table for water, and she was looking down at Grace the way you look at a stain on your carpet. She did not say a word. She simply tilted the pitcher. The ice water hit Grace on the back of the head and cascaded down her neck, soaking through the gray uniform in seconds. The sound of it ice against stone water spreading across the courtyard tiles was loud in the afternoon heat. Grace gasped. Her whole body flinched forward, hands slapping the wet stone to catch herself. But she did not cry out. She did not stand up. She pressed her lips together so hard they went white, and she bowed her head lower, and she kept scrubbing. My heart cracked straight down the middle. Standing just to Eleanor's left, one hand in his trouser pocket, the other resting casually on the iron railing, was Julian Sterling, 38 years old, dark suit hair, slicked back, with the kind of precision that takes 20 minutes in front of a mirror every morning. He was leaning slightly toward the woman beside him, Vivian Vance, his so-called assistant, in a fitted blazer and heels that were absolutely not appropriate for a Tuesday afternoon at home. Julian's hand moved from the railing to the small of Vivian's back, easy and familiar, like a man who had stopped pretending a long time ago. He looked at Grace the way you look at furniture that has been rearranged without your permission, mildly inconvenient, easily corrected. "She's been at that section for 40 minutes, Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the courtyard with the flat precision of a woman who had never once in her life felt the need to raise it. "It still looks streaked to me." Julian glanced down at Grace. "Then she does it again," he said. "Mom's right. Be grateful you're still here, Grace." Grace's shoulders trembled, just once. Then she steadied herself and dipped the scrub brush back into the bucket beside her. I stood behind the garden wall with the boxed apple pie in my hands, and I felt something move through me that I had not felt since the night Linda told me the doctors had found something in her scan. It was the specific terrible helplessness of loving someone and watching them suffer and not being able to reach them fast enough. But I did not move, not yet. Because I had learned something else in 40 years of working on machines. When you find the damage, you document it first. You take photographs. You write down what you see. Because later, when someone tells you that damage was not there, you need to be able to prove it was. I reached into my front trouser pocket with my left hand, kept the pie box steady with my right. My thumb found the side button on my phone, the one I had reassigned 2 weeks ago, after I drove home from that Tuesday visit with my stomach in knots. One long press. The small indicator light on the screen blinked twice. Recording. And through the Bluetooth connection, I had left the running since I parked transmitting live and continuous to the dash cam hard drive in the F150 sitting outside the gate. I stood behind that wall for 4 more minutes. Long enough to watch Eleanor hand the empty pitcher to an unseen staff member without looking at them. Long enough to watch Julian murmur something into Vivian's ear that made her smile and press her hand against his chest. Long enough to watch my daughter wring out the soaking scrub cloth with both hands, her fingers shaking from the cold water, and from something worse than cold water, and set it back against the stone without making a single sound of complaint. Grace had always been the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. She had been that way since she was small. Linda used to say it was Grace's biggest strength and her biggest vulnerability all at once, that enormous bone-deep instinct to keep the peace to absorb the hurt, rather than let it spill onto anyone else. I had always thought Linda was right, that it was a strength. Standing there watching my daughter kneel in a soaking uniform on a 100-degree afternoon while her husband laughed with another woman 10 feet away, I understood for the first time what that instinct had cost her. Eleanor turned to go back inside. She paused at the top of the steps, not even looking back at Grace, and said, "Finish the entire courtyard before dinner, all of it, and change into the dry uniform before you come inside. I won't have you dripping on the floors." Grace said, "Yes, ma'am." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was steady. Whatever it cost her to keep it steady, she paid it without showing the receipt. The doors closed behind Eleanor. Julian said something to Vivian. They both laughed softly, and then they turned and walked back through the side entrance without a backward glance. And Grace was alone in the courtyard on her knees in wet clothes in the July heat, scrubbing stone that was already clean. I looked down at the apple pie box in my hands, at the lopsided little drawing Chloe had made on the lid. Then I looked back at my daughter. I pushed the gate open and walked in. The courtyard was bigger than it looked from behind the wall. It opened up into a wide square of pale stone, ringed by sculpted hedges and iron urns filled with white flowers I did not know the name of. A fountain that probably cost more than my house sat in the center water, trickling down carved limestone tiers in the kind of elegant silence that money buys. Everything in that yard was designed to say people who matter live here. Grace was still on her knees beside the far hedge, her back to me, her wet uniform clinging to her shoulders. She had not heard me come in. She was wringing out the scrub cloth again, her movements mechanical and slow, like a woman running on the last drops of something that should have run out a long time ago. I walked across the courtyard. My boots made sound on the stone's solid, deliberate sound, and Grace went completely still before she turned around. When she saw me, her face did something I was not prepared for. It did not light up. It did not crumble into tears. It went blank with a specific kind of shock, the shock of a person who has been in a bad situation so long, they have forgotten that the outside world still exists, that someone from it might actually come through the gate and walk toward them. "Dad!" Her voice came out cracked and thin, like a door on a hinge that hadn't been opened in years. "Hey, baby girl," I said. My own voice came out steadier than I felt. "Happy birthday to Chloe." Her chin wobbled. She pressed her lips together hard and looked away from me, blinking fast. And I understood she was trying not to fall apart in front of me, the same way she had always tried not to fall apart in front of anyone, because Grace Miller had been taught from somewhere that falling apart was a burden she had no right to place on other people. I set the apple pie box down on the edge of the nearest stone planter. Then I took off my denim jacket, the old one faded blue soft from years of washing, and I walked over to Grace and laid it across her shoulders. She flinched when I touched her. Just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, but I felt it and it went through me like a current. "It's just me," I said quietly. "It's just Dad." Grace pulled the jacket tighter around herself with both hands. And that was when I saw them. The marks on her forearm exposed when her sleeve rode up as she reached for the jacket lapels. Bruises in different shades, the deep purple-black of something recent layered over the sickly yellow-green of something weeks old. Not one impact, not an accident. A pattern. The kind of pattern that only comes from the same thing happening over and over in the same place. My vision went sharp at the edges, the way it does when something shifts inside you that cannot be shifted back. Before I could speak, a voice cut across the courtyard from the direction of the back steps. Mr. Miller. Eleanor Sterling descended the stone steps with the unhurried composure of a woman who had never once in her life been caught off guard. She stopped at the base of the steps, clasped her hands in front of her, and looked at me the way you look at a delivery that has arrived at the wrong address. This is a private residence. You are trespassing. I'm visiting my daughter, I said. I kept my voice even. I had learned a long time ago that the man who stays calm in a loud room is the man who controls the room. You were not invited, Eleanor said, and Grace is occupied with her responsibilities. Her responsibilities. I said it back to her, slowly letting each word sit in the air between us. I looked at Grace still on her knees, wet clothes, bruised arms, barely holding herself together, and then I looked back at Eleanor. Is that what we're calling this? Julian appeared in the doorway above, straightening his cufflinks. Vivian stood just behind his shoulder, her face carefully neutral. Julian came down 3 steps and stopped looking down at me with the practiced ease of a man who was used to being the tallest person in any conversation, even when he was not the tallest person in the room. Dad, Grace said suddenly, and the word came out urgent and low, a warning dressed as a greeting. Dad, it's fine. I'm fine. You didn't need to come all the way up here. She said she's fine, Julian said. He smiled at me, the same smooth, frictionless smile he had used both times we had met, before the smile of a man who had decided I was not a threat before I opened my mouth. Grace is just helping Mom prepare for an event this weekend. It's a busy time. You probably should have called ahead. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were wide and fixed on me, and in them I saw something that squeezed the air out of my chest. Not just fear, but a specific practice pleading. The kind that said, please do not make this worse for me. Please. I will pay for this later. Can you stand up, Grace? I said. She looked at Julian. The look lasted less than 2 seconds, but it said everything she was asking permission, from her husband, to stand up in front of her own father. Julian gave the smallest, nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Grace stayed on her knees. Something hardened in me then. Not hot anger. I have never trusted hot anger. It makes you sloppy, and it makes you loud. What hardened in me was something colder and quieter and much more dangerous. The same thing that hardened in me every time I looked at a machine that someone had broken through carelessness and tried to hide the damage with paint. You need to leave, Julian said, his voice dropping, the smoothness now getting flatter. This is my home. Grace is my wife. You have no authority here, and if you don't leave in the next 60 seconds, I will have security escort you out physically. Eleanor said nothing. She simply watched me with the calm, absolute certainty of a woman who had never lost an argument in this house. I looked at Grace one more time. She was trembling now, her hands pressed flat against her knees, her jaw tight, her eyes filling up with the tears she was refusing to let fall. I opened my mouth to speak, and then from somewhere above us, from the second floor of the house, came the sound of small feet hitting the floor and running fast. Urgent, the particular thunder of a child who has heard something that makes waiting impossible. The back door burst open. Grandpa, Arthur, before I tell you what that little 5-year-old girl said next, the words that stopped everyone in that courtyard, cold, I need to know you are still with me. Drop the number 4 in the comments right now. That is all, just the number 4. So I know you are here, and so I know this story is reaching you. And before we go further, I want to be upfront with you. Parts of this story include fictional elements woven in to bring the deeper truth to life. If that is not something you want to continue with, this is a good place to step away and find something else that suits you. But if you are staying, comment that 4 and let us keep going together. She came through that back door like a small yellow comet. 5 years old, birthday dress the color of sunflowers, 2 dark braids flying out behind her bare feet, slapping against the stone steps as she took them 2 at a time, in the reckless way that only children and people with nothing to lose ever move. She cleared the last step and hit the courtyard running, and she did not slow down, did not look at Eleanor, did not look at Julian, did not look at Vivian. She ran straight at me, like I was the only solid thing in the yard, and she had been waiting for something solid for a very long time. She hit me at full speed, both arms wrapping around my waist. Her face pressed hard into my stomach, and the force of her nearly knocked the breath out of me. "Grandpa," she said into my shirt. Just that. Just the word said, with the kind of relief that should not exist in the vocabulary of a 5-year-old. I put both arms around her and held on. Over the top of her head, I could see Grace. Her hand had come up to cover her mouth, and her eyes had filled up completely. The tears she had been refusing to shed for God knows how long. Finally breaking through, spilling down her cheeks one after another, while she pressed her fingers hard against her lips, trying to keep from making any sound. "Hey there, little one," I said into Chloe's hair. "Happy birthday?" Chloe pulled back just far enough to look up at me. Her face was red and wet. She had been crying before she came downstairs. I realized quietly alone the way children cry, when they know that crying out loud will only make things worse. Her eyes, dark brown, like Grace's like Linda's, searched my face with an intensity that made my chest ache. "You came," she said. "I thought maybe you weren't coming." "I told you I'd be here," I said. "Grandpa always comes when he says he will." Her lower lip trembled. She looked past me at her mother, still kneeling on the wet stone in my denim jacket, and something moved across Chloe's face that no 5-year-old's face should have to carry. A knowledge too heavy for those small features. A worry that had settled in behind her eyes and made them look older than the rest of her. "Mommy's all wet again," Chloe said. The word again landed in the courtyard, like something dropped from a great height. Eleanor took one step forward. Her voice was controlled and precise, the voice of a woman who believed firmly that children were best managed like misbehaving staff, swiftly and without sentiment. "Chloe, go back inside. This is not the time for, you pour water on mommy," Chloe said. She said it the way children state facts, not as an accusation, not with drama, simply as a thing that was true, the same way she might say the sky was blue, or the pie smelled like cinnamon. She turned her head and looked straight at Eleanor with those dark, serious eyes, and she said it again clearer. "You pour water on mommy. You do it a lot." Eleanor's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Chloe, and you make her kneel on the broken pieces," Chloe continued. Her voice was getting thicker now, the way children's voices get when the feelings catch up to the words. "The broken glass from the flower vase. You broke it on purpose, and then you made mommy kneel on it. I saw. I was on the stairs, and I saw, and mommy didn't know I was watching." The air in that courtyard changed. I felt it the way you feel pressure change before a storm, that particular heaviness that settles into your ears and your chest. Julian had gone very still on the steps above us. Vivian had taken a small step backward, just one, as if increasing the distance between herself and what was happening. Chloe's chin was shaking now. The tears were coming faster and her voice was breaking around the words, but she did not stop. She turned to me and grabbed the front of my shirt with both fists, her knuckles pale against the fabric. "Daddy and Miss Vivian, they hit Mommy Grandpa." I heard it. I heard the sound, and then Mommy was crying in the bathroom, and she said she fell, but she didn't fall. I know she didn't fall, because the sound wasn't like falling. It was like, she broke off, pressing her lips together, trying to find the word for a sound a 5-year-old should never have learned to identify. "It was like a hitting sound," she finished. "And they made Mommy sign papers, and Daddy said if Mommy ever told anybody they would take me away, and Mommy would never see me again. And Mommy cries Grandpa every night. I can hear her through the wall, every single night." Grace made a sound behind me. A small broken sound, the sound of a dam that has been holding back too much water for too long, finally finding the crack it cannot repair. She pressed both hands over her face, and her shoulders shook. Julian came down the remaining steps fast. His composure was gone, the smooth surface cracked something harder and colder, showing through underneath. "She's a child," he said, his voice sharp and tight. "She doesn't understand what she's saying. She's confused. She's 5 years old," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "And she just told me exactly what she saw and exactly what she heard. Children don't fabricate details like that, son. They don't invent the sound of someone being hit. They don't make up broken glass." Julian's eyes cut to me, and for the first time since I had walked through that gate, the smile was completely gone. What was underneath it was not something I wanted Chloe to see. I shifted slightly, putting my body between him and her. "This is slander," Eleanor said, from somewhere behind Julian, her voice still precise, but with a new edge to it, the edge of a woman recalculating. A child's confused impressions are not— "Give me your phone, Julian," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Your phone, or anyone's phone. Call your lawyers right now, because in about 45 seconds I'm going to show you something, and after that, you're going to want them on the line." Julian stared at me. Then his eyes dropped to my hand, to the phone I was holding loosely at my side. The screen still lit, the small indicator still running. He moved fast. A snap of his fingers brought the larger of the two security men, crossing the courtyard in 3 long strides. The man's hand closed around my phone before I could react, wrenching it sideways and down. I let it go rather than fight him for it. The security man stepped back, dropped the phone on the stone, and brought his heel down on it. The screen shattered. The casing cracked open. Whatever was left of the device skidded across the wet stone and came to rest against the base of the fountain. Julian looked at me. Something like triumph moved across his face, quick, cold, satisfied. "No evidence, old man." I looked at my broken phone on the ground. Then I looked up at Julian Sterling, and I felt the corners of my mouth pull into what I am told is not a particularly comforting smile. "Son," I said, "that phone was just the bait." I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out the small remote key fob for the F-15, the one I had modified myself in my workshop on a Tuesday night 6 weeks ago. I pressed the button. Through the stone wall and the iron gate, faint but unmistakable, I heard the dash cam unit in the truck chirp twice in confirmation. Every word spoken in this courtyard in the last 22 minutes, I said, has been transmitted live via Bluetooth to the hard drive in my truck, which is sitting outside your gate, which is not on your property. I let that settle for a moment. "You just destroyed a decoy, Julian. The real recording has been safe the whole time." The color left Julian Sterling's face so completely and so quickly that for a moment I thought he might actually fall down. Chloe looked up at me, tears still wet on her cheeks, and said, "Grandpa, did you bring the apple pie?" And despite everything, despite my daughter kneeling on wet stone behind me and the broken phone at my feet and the fury burning cold and steady in my chest, I almost smiled for real. "I did, baby girl," I said. "I sure did." Chloe was still pressed against my side, her small fingers twisted into the fabric of my shirt, when I looked down at her and said, "Sweetheart, can you do something for Grandpa?" She looked up at me, eyes still wet, cheeks still flushed, but steadying herself the way children do when they are given a task, something concrete to hold on to, when the world around them has gone sideways. "What?" she asked. "Can you go inside and get the wooden car I sent you?" The red one. Something shifted in her expression, not confusion recognition. She knew exactly which car I meant. She had known since the moment I walked through that gate, I think, in the way children sometimes know things before they understand why they know them. She nodded, once pulled herself free of my side and ran back up the steps into the house. I watched her go. Then I turned back to Julian. He had recovered some of his color, but not his composure. The composure he had worn through every encounter was gone, and what showed through was something I recognized from decades of working on machines that had been pushed past their limits, the particular brittleness of something that was about to fail. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing rapid, small calculations, moving from me to the gate to Eleanor to Vivian and back again. Eleanor had moved to stand beside her son. She had her arms folded across her chest now, and she was watching me with an expression I could only describe as the look of a chess player who has just realized her opponent has been 3 moves ahead for longer than she understood. "Whatever you think you have," Julian said, "it won't hold up. You were not authorized to record anyone in this house." "Is that right?" I said. I was not asking. "Texas has very clear laws about—" "I know exactly what Texas law says," I said. "I looked it up on a Tuesday night about 6 weeks ago, right after I drove home from visiting my daughter and couldn't sleep. I kept my voice conversational, the same way I talked when I was explaining to a customer why their engine had seized plain, direct, no wasted words. Texas Penal Code, Section 16.02, one-party consent state, meaning that in any conversation, if one of the parties present consents to the recording is legal, no exceptions. Julian's eyes narrowed. "You weren't present for—" "I stayed in this house for 2 nights, 3 weeks ago," I said. "I had breakfast in that kitchen. I sat in that living room. I was a guest in this home. That makes me a party to every conversation that took place in rooms I occupied during that visit. I paused to let that land. And it makes every recording made by a device I placed in this home during that visit entirely legal under Texas law. Every word, every sound, 31 days of it. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard all afternoon. Vivian Vance, who had not said a single word since I walked into the courtyard, took another small step backward. I noticed it. I filed it away. Eleanor unfolded her arms. That is an extraordinarily creative interpretation. She said, her voice still measured, still controlled, but with something underneath it now that had not been there before a hairline fracture, thin as a crack in old porcelain. No court will accept. The back door opened, and Chloe came back out, both hands wrapped around the little red wooden car, carrying it. The careful way children carry things they have been told are special. She came down the steps and walked straight to me and held it up. I took it from her gently. It was good work if I said so, my self-smooth, red paint, real wooden wheels that actually turned small enough to fit in a child's hands but solid enough to last. I had spent 4 evenings on it in the workshop. Linda always said, I built things to last longer than they needed to because I did not know any other way to build. I turned the car upside down. The underside of the chassis was smooth and clean, sanded, sealed, painted red to match. You would have to know exactly where to press and exactly how hard to find the seam. I pressed my thumb against the rear axle, housing pushed inward and down, and the small panel released with a soft click. Inside the cavity, no bigger than a matchbox, sat a matte black unit roughly the size of a book of matches. A small green indicator light blinked once when it saw light, confirming it was still active, still connected, still doing exactly what I had built it to do. Julian stared at it. I watched the understanding move across his face in stages the way a flood moves across flat ground, slow at first, then all at once. Environmental audio recorder, I said. Picks up sound within a radius of approximately 50 feet. Backs up automatically to an encrypted remote server every 6 hours via the household Wi-Fi, which I connected to during my visit 2 weeks ago when Grace gave me the password for the guest network. I closed the panel. 31 days, Julian. Every room Chloe carried this car into, every conversation within 50 feet of wherever she set it down to play. Grace had gotten to her feet somewhere behind me. I could hear her breathing ragged and shallow, the breathing of someone whose entire understanding of the past year is being rewritten in real time. I did not turn around. I did not want to lose sight of Julian's face. Julian's hand shot out. His fingers closed around the wooden car. I let him take it. I had not been planning to stop him. He turned it over in his hands, found the panel, wrenched it open. He pulled the recording unit out and held it between his fingers. This small black rectangle that had been sitting quietly in his house for a month, recording everything he said and did. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at me. This is over, I said quietly. Whatever you thought you were going to do with Grace with the papers you had her sign, with the land, with all of it, it is over. The only question left is how much worse you want to make it for yourself in the next 5 minutes. Julian's arm pulled back. He hurled the recording unit against the stone wall of the fountain with everything he had. It hit the stone and shattered pieces scattering across the wet courtyard tiles. Chloe flinched and grabbed my hand. That's the second piece of equipment you've destroyed today, I said. I was not angry. I was something past angry, something that had gone so far past it that it had come out the other side into a very specific, very clear kind of calm. The server it was backing up to is in a data center in Austin. You'd need considerably more than a fountain to deal with that. Eleanor's hand came down on Julian's arm. She said his name just once very quietly, and the way she said it told me everything about who actually made decisions in this family. Julian's chest was heaving. His hands were shaking, I noticed, not with grief, with rage and with something that might have been for the first time genuine fear. I looked down at Chloe, who was gripping my hand with both of hers and looking up at me with eyes that were wide but dry now. She had stopped crying. Children are like that. They cry until someone shows up who seems to know what to do, and then they stop because they have transferred the weight to somewhere they trust. "Grandpa," she said very quietly, "can we go get Mommy now?" I squeezed her hands. "That's exactly what we're going to do. Little one," I said, "right now." I straightened up, pulled my second phone from my back pocket, the backup I always carried, old habit from years of working remote jobs, where losing one phone meant losing everything. and I looked at Julian one last time. "We're leaving," I said. "All three of us. And I strongly suggest you don't try to stop us." Julian stepped into the doorway. Julian Sterling was not a large man, but he knew how to fill a doorway. He stood with his shoulders squared, and his chin up, one hand resting on the doorframe, blocking the entrance back into the house with the casual authority of someone who had spent his entire life in spaces where his word was the last word. Behind him, deeper in the hallway, I could see the two security men he had called earlier, one broad and thick through the chest, the other leaner, but with the flat, watchful eyes of someone who had done this kind of work before. "Nobody's going anywhere," Julian said. I looked at him. Then I looked at Grace, who had gotten to her feet and was standing just behind my left shoulder, one hand resting on Chloe's head, her fingers trembling slightly in her daughter's hair. Chloe had both arms wrapped around Grace's leg, and her face turned into her mother's hip, and I could feel the tension radiating off both of them, like heat off summer asphalt. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the second phone, the backup. I held it up so Julian could see it clearly, then I dialed. 911, what's your emergency?" "Yes," I said, keeping my eyes on Julian. "My name is Arthur Miller. I read off the address of the Sterling property from the note I had written on my hand before I left the truck that morning. Old mechanics have it always write down the address before you go somewhere you might need to call for help from. I am attempting to remove my 5-year-old granddaughter and my adult daughter from a residence where I have direct documented evidence of ongoing physical abuse. I am being physically blocked from leaving by the homeowner and 2 security personnel. I need officers on scene immediately." The dispatcher started asking questions. I kept my eyes on Julian's face while I answered them. Julian's jaw worked. His hand tightened on the doorframe. He looked back at the 2 security men, and I watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid, cold arithmetic of a man trying to figure out how bad this had just gotten, and how quickly. "You called before you even walked in," he said. It was not quite a question. "From the truck," I said. "Before I came through the service gate, I told them I was going in to check on my daughter and that I had reason to believe there was a dangerous situation on the property." I paused. "They have the address, Julian. They have a timestamp on that call. Anything that happens to me or to Grace or to Chloe between that call and when those officers arrive becomes part of the official record." Eleanor appeared at Julian's shoulder. She put her hand on his arm, not comforting, correcting, and said something to him in a low voice I could not hear. Julian's shoulders dropped by a fraction. He did not move out of the doorway. I put the phone back to my ear. "I'm still here," I told the dispatcher. "The homeowner is currently blocking the exit. Yes, I'll stay on the line." Then I looked at Julian, and I spoke clearly in the same tone I had used 30 years ago, when a junior mechanic in my shop had tried to cut a corner on a brake job, and I needed him to understand exactly what was at stake. Under Texas Family Code, Section 261.301, I said, "Any person who has reasonable cause to believe that a child's physical health or welfare has been adversely affected by abuse is required by law to report it and to take reasonable action to protect that child. That is not optional. That is a legal obligation." I took one step forward. Physically blocking a person who is acting under that obligation in the presence of law enforcement already en route constitutes interference with child custody under Texas Penal Code, Section 25.03. That is a felony, not a misdemeanor. A felony. Another step. Your lawyers are going to tell you exactly what I just told you as soon as you can reach them. I'm saving you the phone call. The larger of the 2 security men shifted his weight. The leaner one glanced at Julian. Nobody moved to stop me. Julian looked at his mother. Eleanor's face had gone very still, the stillness of a woman who was no longer calculating how to win and had started calculating how to limit damage. She gave Julian a single, almost imperceptible nod. Julian stepped aside. I moved through the doorway without rushing Grace's hand in my left hand and Chloe's hand in my right, and we walked down the long hallway and through the front door and across the immaculate front lawn and out through the main gate without anyone following us. The heat outside hit me like a wall. Texas July, full force, the air so thick and hot, it felt like breathing through a warm towel. But after the climate-controlled chill of that house, it felt for one strange second like relief. I got Grace into the passenger seat and lifted Chloe into the back, buckled her in, and went around to the driver's side. My hands, I noticed, were steady. They had been steady through all of it. They did not start shaking until I closed the driver's door and put my key in the ignition and sat there for a moment in the quiet cab with the smell of the apple pie still faint on the air. Then they shook, just for a moment, just long enough for me to press them flat against my thighs and breathe. I started the engine, pulled away from the curb, told the dispatcher we were clear of the property and en route to Parkland Memorial Hospital. For the first 2 minutes, nobody spoke. Chloe was pressed against the window in the back seat, watching the big houses of Highland Park slide past her face, unreadable in the way children's faces get when they are processing something too large for the containers they have available. Grace sat in the passenger seat with the jacket still around her shoulders, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed straight ahead through the windshield. I wanted to say something. I had about 40 things I wanted to say. I kept all of them back and just drove. We had been on the road for maybe 12 minutes, just merging onto the highway, when I heard it, a soft sound from the passenger seat barely audible over the engine. I glanced right. Grace's head was dropping slowly toward the window. Her hands had slipped apart in her lap. The rigid, controlled posture she had been holding all afternoon, the posture of a woman braced for impact every moment of every day, was dissolving vertebra by vertebra, like something that had been under too much pressure for too long and had finally found permission to let go. Grace. I reached across and touched her shoulder. Grace, baby, stay with me. She did not respond. Mommy. Chloe's voice from the back seat went up sharp with alarm. Mommy, wake up, Grandpa. Mommy won't wake up. Grace's head came to rest against the passenger window. Her breathing was slow, and even not the breathing of someone in crisis, but the breathing of someone who had simply completely run out of the last reserves of everything that had been holding them upright. I put my hazard lights on, moved to the right lane, and reached for the phone. I need an ambulance on I-35 northbound between Highland Park and downtown. My daughter has lost consciousness. She was not injured just now. She's been the victim of prolonged physical abuse, and I believe her body has gone into shock. Yes, I'll stay on the line. From the back seat, Chloe's voice came small and terrified and fierce all at once. Grandpa, is Mommy going to be okay? I looked in the rearview mirror at my granddaughter, 5 years old. Birthday dress, tear-stained face, holding on to the little red wooden car with both hands, like it was the only anchor she had left in the world. Yes, I said. Grandpa is right here. Mommy is going to be okay. I promise you, Chloe. Grandpa is not going anywhere. Parkland Memorial Hospital has seen everything. It is one of the oldest and largest trauma centers in Dallas, a place built for the worst moments of people's lives, and the staff there carry that knowledge in the way they move, purposeful, unhurried, the particular calm of people who have learned that panic costs time and time costs lives. When the ambulance pulled in through the bay doors with Grace on the stretcher, 2 nurses and an intake physician met them before the wheels stopped rolling. I parked the F-150 in the lot, unbuckled Chloe from the back seat, and carried her inside. She had stopped crying somewhere on the highway, the way exhausted children do. Not because things were better, but because she had simply used up everything she had. She was heavy against my shoulder, her arms loose around my neck, her breathing slow and deep. She was still holding the little red wooden car. Even asleep or close to it, her fingers would not let go of it. The intake desk directed me to the 3rd floor. I rode the elevator up with Chloe against my shoulder, and a feeling in my chest that I had no name for, heavier than fear, quieter than grief. Something in between that sat behind my sternum and pressed. The waiting area outside the examination suite was a row of plastic chairs bolted to the wall under fluorescent lights. I sat down in the one nearest the door, shifted Chloe so she was lying across my lap with her head on my arm, and I waited. Hospitals have their own particular silence. Not empty, not peaceful. A silence made up of sounds that are all trying very hard to be quiet. The soft rhythm of equipment. Voices kept deliberately low. Footsteps that move fast but do not run. I sat in that silence for 2 hours, and I did not move, and I did not let myself think too far ahead, because I have learned over the years that thinking too far ahead in a waiting room is how a man loses his nerve before he needs it most. At just past 6 in the evening, the door to the examination suite opened and a woman in a white coat came out. She was perhaps 45, Korean American, with close-cropped hair, and the kind of steady, direct eyes that told you she had delivered hard news before and had learned how to do it without flinching away from it. She looked at me, then at Chloe sleeping across my lap. and she pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down across from me rather than standing over me, which I noted and appreciated. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I'm Dr. Sandra Park. I'm the attending physician for your daughter. How is she?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "She's stable," Dr. Park said. "She regained consciousness about 40 minutes after arrival. She's alert and she's talking." She paused, folding her hands in her lap. "Mr. Miller, I need to tell you what we found during the examination, and I need you to prepare yourself because some of it is difficult to hear." "Tell me," I said. Dr. Park told me. 6 separate clusters of bruising in different stages of healing, distributed across her arms, her upper back, and her rib cage. 2 fractured ribs on the left side that had never been treated. They had begun to heal on their own, improperly, in a way that would require monitoring going forward. Lacerations on both knees, scarring, consistent with repeated contact with sharp objects over an extended period. Mild malnutrition indicators suggesting irregular access to adequate food. And signs of what Dr. Park described in the careful, precise language of medicine as chronic stress-induced physical deterioration, the kind of damage that accumulates in a body that has been running on fear and adrenaline for so long that it has begun to break down its own resources just to keep functioning. "This has been ongoing for at least 14 months, Dr. Park said. Possibly longer." I pressed my lips together. I pressed them together hard, and I looked at the far wall, and I breathed through my nose slow, and even the way I had taught myself to breathe when something was too big to process all at once, and I needed to stay functional. Chloe stirred slightly on my lap. I put my hand on her back and kept it there. "The loss of consciousness in the vehicle," Dr. Park continued, her voice gentle but unsparing, "is consistent with acute vasovagal response triggered by the sudden removal of a sustained threat. In simpler terms, her nervous system had been running in emergency mode for so long that the moment it registered she was safe, it essentially shut down non-essential functions. Her body needed to stop." She paused. "Mr. Miller, what happened in that car was not a medical emergency in the traditional sense. It was your daughter's body finally allowing itself to collapse. Something happened behind my eyes then. A pressure that had been building since I walked through that service gate in Highland Park finally found the crack it had been looking for. I bent my head forward. I pressed the hand that was not on Chloe's back against my eyes. And I sat there in that plastic chair in the fluorescent-lit hallway of Parkland Memorial, and I cried quietly, the way men of my generation cry when they have spent their whole lives being told that crying is something you do in private. But I cried, and I did not try to stop it. Because there are some things that simply need to come out before you can carry what comes next. I thought about Grace at 8 years old, sitting on the kitchen counter while I fixed the garbage disposal and singing along badly to the radio and not caring at all that she was off key. I thought about her at 17, crying on the back porch after her first real heartbreak, letting me sit next to her without saying anything, because she had always known that my presence meant more than my words. I thought about the way she had looked on her wedding day, luminous and nervous, and so hopeful it had made my chest ache even then, even as I shook Julian Sterling's hand and told myself the tightness in my gut was just a father being overly protective. I should have listened to my gut. I felt a small hand on my arm. I looked up. Chloe was awake. She was looking at me with those dark, serious eyes still half drowsy, her hair flattened on one side from sleeping against my arm. She reached up and very carefully patted my cheek with her small palm, the way she had seen adults comfort each other, the gesture slightly too large and slightly too deliberate to be fully natural, but entirely sincere. "It's okay, Grandpa," she said. "You came. That's the part that matters." My throat closed completely. I put my arms around her and held on. A few minutes later, Dr. Park returned with a woman I had not seen before. Perhaps 48 dark blazer reading glasses pushed up on her head, a leather portfolio under her arm, and the brisk, purposeful manner of someone who had learned to move fast in institutions that moved slowly. "Mr. Miller." Dr. Park said, "This is Carol Simmons. She's with Legal Aid Dallas. Our hospital has a protocol when we file a mandatory report under Texas Family Code 261.101. We notify legal aid, so that an attorney can be made available to the family immediately. Ms. Simmons was on call tonight." Carol Simmons looked at me steadily. She had the eyes of someone who had heard a great many difficult stories and had decided a long time ago to do something about them rather than simply witness them. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I understand you have documentation." She glanced at the portfolio in her hands. "I'd like to hear everything, all of it, from the beginning." I looked at her. Then I looked at Chloe, who was watching Carol with the careful assessment of a child who has learned to evaluate adults quickly. "How much time do you have?" I asked. Carol pulled a chair over and sat down. "As much as you need," she said. We had been talking for 40 minutes, Carol taking notes in her precise, small handwriting, asking questions that cut straight to the points that mattered when my backup phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number, Dallas area code. I held up one finger to Carol and answered, "Mr. Miller." The voice was male-measured, carrying the particular flat authority of someone who had spent decades in rooms where authority was the only currency that mattered. "My name is Detective Ray Holloway, Dallas Police Department. I just received a mandatory report filed by Parkland Memorial Hospital approximately 2 hours ago." A pause. "I think we need to have a conversation tonight, in person." I looked at Carol. She had stopped writing and was watching me. "Where and when?" I said. The Dallas Police Department's Criminal Investigations Division occupied the 4th floor of a building on Commerce Street that smelled like old coffee and carpet that had absorbed 30 years of difficult conversations. Detective Ray Holloway met me in the lobby at 8:15 and walked me up himself rather than sending someone. He was a big man, not tall, but solid, the kind of solid that comes from a lifetime of physical work, rather than a gym, with a face that had seen weather and decisions, and the particular weariness that accumulates in men who have spent decades watching what people are capable of doing to each other. He had a veteran's handshake firm, brief no performance to it, and he looked at me the way experienced investigators look at everyone when they first meet them, gathering information, not yet deciding what to do with it. Carol had stayed at the hospital with Chloe, who was finally in a proper bed in the pediatric observation ward, her small body surrendered completely to the sleep it had been needing for God knows how long. Grace was in a room 2 floors up stable and resting with a hospital social worker who would be with her when she woke up. I had kissed Grace's forehead before I left. She had not stirred. I was glad. Holloway's office was a workspace, not a showroom. His desk held 3 open case folders, a coffee mug that looked like it had been refilled approximately 400 times without being washed, and a computer monitor angled slightly away from the visitor's chair, which told me he was the kind of man who did not like people reading his screen over his shoulder. A corkboard on the wall behind him held a city map with colored pins in it, photographs, notes. The organized chaos of a man who kept everything because he never knew what would matter later. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I sat. He sat. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me steadily. "Before we start," he said, "I want to be straight with you, Mr. Miller. I've been on this job for 26 years. I know who the Sterlings are. Everybody in Dallas law enforcement knows who the Sterlings are." He said it without apology, without embarrassment, just fact, the way a mechanic tells you a part is worn before he tells you what it will cost to fix it. That family has relationships with people in this building and in the building across the street where the mayor's office is. I've seen cases involving prominent families in this city quietly lose momentum before they get anywhere near a courtroom. I am not telling you that because I intend to let that happen. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what we are walking into, and I want you to be very sure that what you have is as solid as you believe it is. He held my gaze while he said all of that, and I held his right back. "I appreciate you saying that straight," I said. "Most people don't. Most people waste time," Holloway said. "I'd rather not." He uncapped a pen and pulled a legal pad toward him. "Tell me what you have." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the external hard drive I had transferred the dash cam footage to in the hospital parking lot, using the small laptop I kept behind the seat of the F-150 for job estimates. I set it on his desk. "And that drive has the complete dash cam footage from my truck," I said, "which includes a live Bluetooth feed from the moment I entered the Sterling property this afternoon until the moment I left. Audio and some video. The dash cam angle doesn't cover the interior courtyard, but the audio transmission came through clean." I set a second smaller drive next to the first. "That one has the first 7 days of environmental audio from the device I placed in the house. I've already transferred the rest to Carol Simmons at legal aid. She has custody of the primary server backup." Holloway looked at both drives. He did not touch them immediately, which told me he was thinking about chain of custody, before he was thinking about content, the mark of someone who knew how evidence worked in a courtroom, not just in a detective's office. "Walk me through the device in the house," he said. I need to understand the legal basis before I plug anything in. I walked him through it. Texas Penal Code, Section 16.02, one-party consent, my visit 2 weeks prior, the guest network, the environmental recorder and the wooden car. He listened without interrupting his pen, moving steadily on the legal pad, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at his notes. Your daughter gave you the Wi-Fi password during that visit, he said. Yes. Voluntarily, without any prompting from you about why you wanted it. She said the signal was better in the back of the house and offered it so I could use my phone without burning through my data plan, I said. She mentioned it while we were having coffee in the kitchen. Holloway nodded, made a note. And you were physically present in the residence during that visit for how long? 2 nights, arrived Tuesday morning, left Thursday afternoon. He made another note. Then he picked up the first drive, looked at it for a moment, and plugged it into his computer. He turned the monitor so I could see the edge of it, not the whole screen, but enough to show he was not hiding what he was doing. He put on a pair of reading glasses, navigated to the drive, and opened the first audio file. Eleanor Sterling's voice filled the small office, clean and cold and contemptuous, giving instructions to a woman on her knees in the July heat. Holloway listened. He did not react, which was not the same as not feeling anything. I have known enough quiet men to understand that. His pen was still. His face was still. He listened to Eleanor. He listened to Julian. He listened to Vivian's small, complicit laugh. Then he listened to Chloe. Her voice, 5 years old, birthday dress, the weight of things no child should carry, came out of the computer speakers in that small office on Commerce Street. And even Holloway could not keep his face entirely still for that. Something moved across it briefly behind his eyes, and his jaw tightened by a fraction before he controlled it again. She talked about the broken glass. She talked about the dark room. She talked about Mommy crying every single night. Holloway stopped the file. He took his reading glasses off. He looked at his desk for a moment, not at me, not at the monitor, just at his desk, the way a man looks at a fixed point when he needs a second to put something back in the box it came out of so he can keep functioning. Then he looked up, picked up his desk phone, and dialed an internal extension. This is Holloway, he said when someone picked up. Get me the DA's nightline. Yes, tonight. No, it absolutely cannot wait until morning. Tell them I have documented evidence of sustained family violence, financial fraud, and a minor witness. Tell them I need someone on the phone in the next 20 minutes. He paused, listening. I don't care if they're at dinner. Get them on the phone. He hung up. He looked at me. I'm going to need your full formal statement tonight, he said, written and recorded. I'm going to need Carol Simmons's contact information and authorization to speak with her directly about the server backup. I'm going to need the name of the hospital social worker currently with your daughter, and I'm going to need Dr. Park's formal report as soon as it's filed. He paused. And I'm going to need you to take me through the timeline from the beginning. Every visit, every phone call, every detail you noticed that made you build that device and put it in that house. I have all night, I said. Holloway almost smiled. It was small and brief and gone before it fully arrived, but it was there. Good, he said, because this is going to take a while. He stood, refilled his coffee from a carafe on the filing cabinet behind him, did not offer me any, which I did not mind, and settled back into his chair with his legal pad and his pen. And he looked at me over the rim of his mug with the steady, focused attention of a man who had decided, without announcing it, that this case was going to go somewhere. Start from the beginning, Mr. Miller, he said. The very beginning. When did you first notice something was wrong? I thought of Grace's voice on the phone, the way it had gone flat and careful, the words coming out too fast, the silence at the end of each sentence that was shaped like someone standing nearby, listening. About 8 months ago, I said. But I think it started before that. I think I just wasn't listening closely enough. Holloway wrote that down. Outside his window, Dallas glittered in the summer dark, indifferent and enormous, going about its business the way cities do, unaware that in a small office on the 4th floor of a building on Commerce Street, the process had just begun that would eventually bring down one of its most prominent families, one recorded word at a time. Before I left the hospital that evening, before I drove to the police station, before I sat across from Holloway and laid everything out, I had done one more thing. Grace's personal cell phone had been in the pocket of the gray uniform she was wearing when the paramedics brought her in. The attending nurse had placed it in the small plastic bag of Grace's belongings and left it on the bedside table. While Carol sat with Grace and the social worker, took notes, I had stood in the corner of that hospital room and scrolled through Grace's contacts. I was looking for one name in particular. I found it under the listing she had saved simply as Rosa House. I copied the number into my backup phone and sent a text message before I left the parking lot. "This is Arthur Miller. I am Grace's father. I know what happened in that house, and I know you saw it. I know you're scared. Please don't delete this. A lawyer named Carol Simmons from Legal Aid Dallas is involved. She can help you. Please meet me tonight." I had not known if Rosa would respond. I had not known if she would even read it. Some people, when they have been controlled for long enough, stop believing that outside help is real, that it arrives, that it stays, that it does not eventually fold under the same pressure that everything else is folded under. But Rosa Delgado had responded. 40 minutes into my session with Holloway, my phone had buzzed once on his desk. Where? It was 11:47 at night when Holloway and I pulled up outside the Sterling property in his unmarked sedan. The house was lit, not all of it, but enough. Lights on the second floor, a lamp moving behind a curtain on the east side. Someone awake in there, pacing or planning, or both. "We're not going in tonight," Holloway said, looking at the house through the windshield. "I've got to call in for a search warrant, but that takes time, especially on a case involving a family with this kind of legal firepower. I want everything airtight before we step foot on that property officially." He glanced at me. "Your Rosa contact where?" "She asked for the parking lot of the Kroger on Mockingbird Lane," I said, 4 blocks east. Holloway nodded and pulled away from the curb. The Kroger lot was mostly empty at that hour, a few cars scattered near the entrance, the yellow glow of the store lights pooling on the asphalt, a shopping cart drifting slowly in the hot night breeze. We parked near the far end, away from the lights, and waited. She arrived on foot, which told me she had walked from the Sterling property. She was wearing a dark hoodie pulled up despite the heat, and she moved along the edge of the lot with the particular wariness of someone who has spent years making themselves invisible in spaces that do not belong to them. She was perhaps 40, with dark eyes that had the deep, careful quality of someone who watched everything and recorded all of it somewhere inside where it was safe. I got out of the car. Holloway stayed inside. We had agreed on that. A police detective getting out of an unmarked car at midnight was not the best opening for a conversation with someone who had every reason to be afraid of authority. "Rosa," I said. She stopped about 10 feet away. Her eyes moved from me to the car to me again. "Who's in the car?" she said. Her English was careful and precise, the English of someone who had worked hard to learn it and was not going to be careless with it. "A detective from Dallas PD," I said. "His name is Holloway. He is here because I asked him to be, not because he is here for you. He is not going to approach you. He is not going to ask you for any documentation tonight. That is not what this is." Rosa's jaw worked. She looked at the car again. Holloway, to his credit, had angled himself away from the window, visible enough to be honest, unobtrusive enough not to threaten. "They know I am undocumented," Rosa said. The words came out flat and practiced the way people say things they have said many times in their own heads before they say them out loud. "Mrs. Eleanor, she told me the first week I worked there. She said she had looked into my background and that she knew my situation, and that as long as I did my job and minded my own business, it would stay between us. She said it like she was doing me a favor." Her mouth tightened. "She reminded me every few months, just to make sure I had not forgotten." My phone buzzed. Carol checking in. I put it on speaker and held it between us. "Rosa." Carol's voice came through steady, professional, unhurried. "My name is Carol Simmons. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid Dallas. I specialize in family law and immigration cases. I want to tell you about something called a U visa." Rosa's eyes went to the phone. She did not move closer, but she did not move away. "A U visa," Carol continued, "is a specific type of immigration protection created by the United States government for non-citizen victims or witnesses of serious crimes who cooperate with law enforcement. If you have witnessed abuse, if you have information that helps investigators, in this case you are eligible to apply. The application provides immediate temporary protection from deportation while it is being processed. ICE cannot touch you during that period." A pause. "I want to be honest with you. The visa process takes time, sometimes years. I cannot promise you it will be fast, but I can promise you that the moment you agree to cooperate and I file that application, you are protected. Tonight. Not eventually. Tonight." Rosa stood very still in the parking lot. the hot night air moving her hoodie slightly. Her hands, I noticed, were clasped together in front of her, her fingers interlocked, squeezing, not trembling. Squeezing the way people hold themselves together when they are making a decision that costs something. "I have a daughter," Rosa said. "She is 12. She was born here. She is a citizen. If I am deported—" "Your daughter's citizenship is not affected by your status," Carol said immediately. "And with a U visa application on file, your removal proceedings, if any are pending, are automatically stayed. Your daughter is not losing her mother, Rosa, not if you talk to us." Something shifted in Rosa's face. The tightness around her eyes did not go away entirely, but it changed quality from the tightness of someone bracing for impact to the tightness of someone who has been bracing for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like not to. "What do you need to know?" she said. I exhaled slowly. "Tell me what you saw," I said. "All of it, from the beginning." Rosa told us. She had worked in the Sterling house for 3 years, she said. She had seen the change happen gradually, the way Grace arrived as a bride and became something else over the following months, something smaller and more careful, like a plant that has been moved away from the light and does not understand why it is failing, but keeps trying anyway. Rosa had noticed the first bruise 6 months in, had noticed the second one a month after that, had told herself it was not her business, not her place, not her risk to take. But then she had seen Ellen or Mrs. Sterling deliberately sweep a glass vase off the hallway table with one smooth, deliberate motion, and crouch down and pick out 3 of the larger fragments and call Grace into the hallway and point to the floor. "She made her kneel on it," Rosa said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "Not once. Mrs. Eleanor did this. I saw it myself, at least once a week for 6 months. She would break something, choose the pieces, call Grace, and Grace would kneel because Mrs. Eleanor would look at her and say, if she did not, she would call her lawyers and Grace would never see Chloe again." Rosa pressed her clasped hands against her chest. "I cleaned up after. Every time. I knew what I was cleaning. I told myself there was nothing I could do. I tell myself a lot of things." Holloway's car window went down an inch. He was listening. "The morning that Mr. Miller came," Rosa continued, "I heard Mrs. Eleanor make a phone call, early before anyone else was awake. I was in the laundry room off the kitchen folding linens and the kitchen door was not completely closed. I was not trying to listen. But she was not trying to be quiet either because she did not know I was there." Rosa looked at me directly. "She called someone at the city transportation office. She said she needed the traffic camera footage from the 2 blocks around the property not to be saved for that day. She said she would handle the paperwork on her end. She called them by their first name. The hair on my arms went up. She bribed someone to kill the footage," I said. "I don't know the word for what she did," Rosa said. "I know what I heard." I looked at Holloway's car. The window went down another inch. Rosa reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a page torn from a small notebook, a phone number written in careful block letters. "The woman named Vivian," she said, "the one who was always in the house. 2 days ago, I heard her crying in the parking garage when she thought no one was around. She was on her phone saying Mr. Julian had changed the terms of something, and that she had not agreed to take the blame for everything." Rosa held the paper out to me. "I don't know what it means, but I kept her number. I thought maybe someone should have it." I took the paper, looked at the number, looked at Rosa. "You did the right thing tonight," I said. "Coming here, talking to us, I know what it cost you." Rosa's chin went up slightly, not with pride exactly, but with the specific dignity of someone who has made a decision they know is right and is claiming it regardless of the fear still sitting heavy in their chest. "I cleaned up after Grace for 2 years, she said quietly. "I think it was time I did something different." We are now in the middle of this story, and what I am about to reveal next is the piece that changes everything, the real reason Grace was chosen, the secret Julian carried from the very first day. Before I tell you, type "I knew it" in the comments if you suspected something was off about this marriage from the beginning, or type "I had no idea" if this is catching you completely off guard. Either way, I need you with me for what comes next. A reminder, this story contains some fictional elements, details shaped to carry a message worth hearing. What happens in real families and real homes behind closed doors is often quieter and harder to prove than anything in a story. If this is difficult for you to hear, it is okay to step away. But if you are ready, let us finish this together. Grace was discharged from Parkland Memorial at 7:15 the following morning. She walked out through the sliding doors in a set of clean clothes Carol had arranged through the hospital's family services department. Dark jeans, a gray t-shirt, a light cardigan that covered her arms. She was moving carefully the way people move when their body has been through something significant and is reminding them of it with every step. But she was upright and she was walking on her own, and when she came through those doors and saw me standing by the truck with Chloe on my hip, she stopped for a second and pressed her hand flat against her sternum, like she was checking that her heart was still where she left it. Chloe launched herself from my arms before I could say anything. "Mommy," she wrapped both arms around Grace's neck with a force that made Grace stagger one step backward, and Grace caught her and held on, and the sound Grace made into Chloe's hair was something between a laugh and a sob, half relief and half grief. The sound of a person who has been trying to protect something so hard for so long that finally holding it without fear is almost more than they can process. "I've got you," Grace said into Chloe's hair. "Mommy's got you. We're okay." I stood by the truck and let them have that. Some moments don't need a third person in them. Carol Simmons's office at Legal Aid Dallas was on the second floor of a building on Griffin Street, spare and functional in the way offices are, when the people who occupy them spend their energy on the work rather than the surroundings. 2 chairs across from her desk, a bookshelf of legal references along one wall, a window that looked out over a parking structure. Carol was already there when we arrived. Coffee made a stack of documents on her desk that told me she had been there for some time before we showed up. Grace sat in one of the chairs across from Carol's desk. Chloe settled on her lap with a coloring book Carol had produced from a drawer, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had dealt with enough family crisis situations to know that a child with something to do is a child who is not adding to the chaos. I took the chair beside Grace. Carol looked at us both over the rims of her reading glasses. "Detective Holloway's team executed the search warrant at the Sterling property at 6 this morning," she said. "They collected financial records, personal correspondence, and a significant volume of legal documentation. The DA's office is already pulling it apart." She paused. "I've been reviewing copies of what they sent over, and I need to ask you something, Arthur, before we go further." "Ask," I said. "Your late wife," Carol said carefully. "Linda Miller. Did she have family in South Texas, specifically in the Permian Basin area, Pecos County, around the Midland-Odessa region?" I felt something shift in the room, not a physical thing, something atmospheric, the particular stillness that comes just before something large and irreversible is said out loud. "Linda grew up in Pecos County," I said slowly. "Her family farmed out there for 3 generations, small operation. Her parents passed when she was in her 30s, left her the land. We used to drive out there every few years before she got sick. Dry country mostly, scrub grass and caliche. Worth enough to pay the property taxes and not much else far as we knew." Carol set a document on the desk between us and turned it so I could read it. It was a copy of Linda's will. Our original was in a filing cabinet at home in Corsicana, but it had been annotated in Carol's small, precise handwriting with a sticky note attached to the section that dealt with the land bequests to Grace. The land was assessed at approximately $47,000 when Linda passed, Carol said. At the time, that valuation was accurate. Scrubland, minimal agricultural value, no significant mineral development in the immediate area. She paused. That changed about 14 months ago when a series of exploratory drilling operations in the adjacent sections confirmed the presence of a substantial natural gas deposit running beneath a 9-mile corridor in that part of Pecos County. She let that sit. Linda's parcel sits directly above the center of that corridor. Current assessed value of the mineral rights alone, separate from the surface land, is approximately $41 million. The number sat in the middle of Carol's desk, like something that had fallen from a great height. Grace made a sound. Not a word, just a sound small and involuntary, the kind that comes out when the mind receives information that it cannot immediately organize into anything coherent. I looked at the document. I looked at Linda's name on it in the plain legal font that reduces a person's entire life to a series of bequests and whereases and heretofores. I thought about Linda driving that stretch of highway through Pecos County, with the windows down and the hot desert air coming through, and her arm resting on the door, and her saying, "That's my grandfather's land out there. Arthur, 4 generations of my family worked that ground and never got rich off it, but they were proud of it, and so am I." She had been proud of it. It had been worth $47,000, and she had been proud of it because it was hers and it was her family's, and it meant something that had nothing to do with money. My jaw tightened until it ached. "The Sterlings knew," I said. It was not a question. "Their legal team conducted a thorough background investigation on Grace before the engagement," Carol said. "Standard practice for a family of that financial profile entering into a marriage. The timing of the mineral deposit confirmation aligns almost exactly with the acceleration of Julian's interest in Grace." She turned another page. 3 months after the drilling confirmation was made public, not widely publicized, but public record, Julian proposed. Grace was staring at the document on the desk. Her hands resting on top of Chloe's coloring book had gone very still. Not the rigid stillness of control, but the stillness of a person who has stopped everything because they need every available resource just to process what they are hearing. "He knew before he asked me," Grace said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but it was steady the way things are steady when they have gone past the point of trembling and arrived at something harder. "He knew about the land before he ever said he loved me." I reached over and put my hand over both of hers. She turned one hand over and gripped mine so hard that her knuckles went white, but she did not look at me. She kept her eyes on the document. "None of it was real," she said. "Not one single day of it." "Grace," I started. "I want to hear the rest," she said, quiet but firm. "Tell me the rest, Miss Simmons. All of it." Carol looked at Grace for a moment, assessing, I thought, how much this woman could take, and concluding correctly that the answer was more than it appeared. She turned another page. "There are documents in the collection bearing Grace's signature that transfer partial mineral rights from the Pecos County parcel to a Sterling subsidiary called Vantage Land Holdings LLC," Carol said. 13 documents in total, executed at various points over the past 11 months. She set one on the desk. "Grace, I need to ask you directly. Do you recognize this document?" Grace looked at it, leaned forward slightly. Chloe, shifting on her lap without waking, studied the signature at the bottom. "I've never seen this before," she said. "I don't know what mineral rights are. I didn't know I had any." She looked up at Carol. That signature is close, but it's not right. Look at the way the G curves. I've written my name 10,000 times. I don't curve the G like that. I never have." Carol nodded, and something in her expression sharpened with the particular focus of an attorney who has just had a key piece confirmed. "I noticed the same inconsistency," she said. "Across all 13 documents, the signature is close, professionally close practiced, but there are consistent small deviations from your authenticated signature on file in the county records." She looked over her reading glasses at Grace. "Someone forged these, Grace. Someone who had access to numerous examples of your handwriting and spent considerable time replicating it. But they couldn't replicate what they didn't know to look for." Grace's breath caught. Then she said, "There's one more thing." She straightened slightly, and I recognized the look on her face, the look of someone who has been carrying a small, half-forgotten detail and has suddenly understood what it means. "About 8 months ago, Julian gave me a document to sign in the study. He said it was a household account authorization, something to do with automatic billing. I remember I felt wrong about it. I couldn't have told you why I just felt wrong, and I signed it because by then I had learned that not signing things Julian wanted signed had consequences." She paused. "But I signed my full middle name, Marie. I never do that. I always just use the initial. I don't know why I did it. Something in me just did it differently." Carol set her pen down. She looked at Grace with an expression I had not seen on her face before, something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to it, the expression of someone who has just found the thread that unravels everything. "Oh," she said, "that document with your full middle name is in the collection. The forged signatures don't use your middle name at all. In 13 documents, not once." She picked up her pen again. "You just gave me the cleanest proof of forgery I have seen in 11 years of practice." Grace's hand tightened on mine until the bones shifted. Her chin was trembling just slightly, and her eyes were very bright. "Mom left me that land," she said. The words came out barely above a whisper. "She left it to me, and they tried to take it." "They did," I said, "and they're not going to." Holloway arrived at Carol's office at 9:45 with a manila folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. He did not sit down. He stood at the edge of Carol's desk, opened the folder, and laid 3 documents on top of the ones already spread across the surface. His face had the look of a man who had been awake all night and had found something during those hours that had made the sleeplessness worthwhile and disturbing in equal measure. "Forensic accounting team worked through the night," he said. "Here's what we have." He walked us through it in the direct, unembellished way he did everything. Vivian Vance had used Grace's forged signatures on 17 separate financial instruments, loan applications, promissory notes, authorization documents, all routed through a shell company called Meridian Capital Advisors, LLC, which existed on paper and nowhere else. Total borrowed against those instruments $8,900,000, sourced from 3 private lending entities, 2 of them international. Grace was the named guarantor on all of it, Holloway said. Her name, her forged signature, a company she technically had no knowledge of, but was listed as a director of on-incorporation documents she never signed. He looked at Grace directly. When this came apart, and it was always going to come apart, these structures always do. The plan was for investigators to follow the paper trail straight to you. Grace's face had gone the color of the wall behind her. "They were going to arrest me," she said. Not a question, a statement of something she was working to make real inside her head. "That was the plan," Holloway said. "The abuse wasn't incidental, Mrs. Sterling." He caught himself. "Ms. Miller, the abuse was functional. Break someone down far enough, long enough, and they stop fighting. They accept what they're told. They sign what's put in front of them, and they don't ask questions, and when the authorities come, they don't have the resources left to defend themselves." Grace pressed both hands flat on Carol's desk and leaned forward and breathed, just breathed. Her shoulders were shaking, but her jaw was set and her eyes were open, and she was not looking away from any of it. "They spent 14 months doing that to me," she said, "so that I would go to prison for what they did." "Yes," Holloway said. He did not soften it. I respected him for that. Carol leaned forward. "Grace, the document you mentioned, the one where you signed your full middle name. That document is in this collection." She pulled a page from the stack. "Look." Grace looked at it. "Now look at every other document with your supposed signature." Carol fanned 3 across the desk. "Marie does not appear once. Not on any of them. Whoever forged these signatures had dozens of examples of your handwriting. They knew your first name, your last name, the way you write your initials. But they had no idea you ever used your middle name because you almost never did." She set her pen down. "Grace, you accidentally created a forensic control sample. 14 months of abuse, and you still found a way, without even knowing it, to protect yourself." Something moved across Grace's face then that I had not seen since before she married Julian Sterling. Not happiness, it was too early and too raw for happiness, but something underneath happiness. Something that looked like the first returning evidence of a person who had been buried for a very long time, remembering that they still existed. Her chin trembled, her eyes filled, and then for the first time since I had walked through that service gate the previous afternoon, my daughter straightened her spine. "What do we do next?" she said. Carol picked up her pen. Holloway straightened the papers in his folder. I put my hand on Grace's shoulder and felt under my palm the slow return of something I had been afraid I would not find again, the particular tension of a person who has decided to fight. "We go to court," Carol said, "and we win. 8 months is a long time to wait for justice and a short time to rebuild a life. We spent those months in a rented house in Garland, 20 minutes east of Dallas, small, clean, with a yard big enough for Chloe to run in, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee in the mornings, and sometimes on weekends like apple pie. Grace started sleeping through the night around month 3. I know because I was in the spare bedroom down the hall, and I stopped waking up at 2 a.m., listening for sounds that did not come. The night before the trial, I could not sleep at all. I was sitting at the kitchen table at 10:30 with a cup of coffee gone cold when I heard the small feet on the hallway floor. Chloe appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, the yellow ones with the stars clutching the little red wooden car against her chest, her hair loose around her face, her eyes wide and serious. "Can't sleep either," I said. She shook her head and climbed into the chair across from me and sat with her feet tucked under her, the way she always sat when she was settling in for something important. "Grandpa," she said, "will the bad people go to jail tomorrow?" "That's what we're going to make sure of," I said. She chewed on that for a moment. Then, "Are you scared?" I looked at my cold coffee, then at her. "A little," I said. "But scared and brave aren't opposites, Chloe. You can be both at the same time." Her brow furrowed the way it did when she was working something out. "Like when I told you about Mommy," she said slowly. "I was really scared, but I said it anyway." My throat tightened. "Exactly like that," I said. "You were the bravest person in that yard. You know that?" She looked down at the wooden car in her hands, running her thumb along the smooth red paint. Then she looked up. "Grandpa who's in the picture, the one you always keep in your pocket." I reached into the inside pocket of my denim jacket and took out the photograph, set it on the table between us. Linda at 42. The same photograph I had carried every day since her funeral, her laughing, her eyes bright, the Pecos County sky wide behind her. "That's your grandmother," I said. "Her name was Linda. She passed before you were old enough to know her." Chloe leaned forward and studied the photograph with the solemn attention children give to things that matter. "She looks like Mommy," she said. My chest pulled tight. "She does," I said. "She really does." Was she brave too? I thought about Linda driving that stretch of highway through Pecos County with her arm out the window. Linda sitting with Grace on the back porch after Grace's first heartbreak, not saying anything, just being there. Linda in the hospital bed in the last weeks holding my hand and telling me not to make a fuss. She had lived a good life, and she meant it. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," I said. "She used to say a person's dignity isn't something anyone can take from you. You can only give it away. And she never gave hers away. Not once." Chloe reached across the table and touched the edge of the photograph with one small finger. "I think she'd be happy you came," she said, "to get Mommy." I could not speak for a moment. I pressed my lips together and looked at the photograph and nodded. Chloe slid off her chair and came around the table and climbed into my lap without asking, because she never asked. She just knew when it was the right thing to do. I put my arms around her, and she leaned her head back against my chest, and we sat there in the quiet kitchen, while Dallas settled into its nighttime rhythms outside the window. After a while, her breathing slowed and deepened. I sat a while longer, her warm weight against me, the photograph of Linda on the table in the lamplight. Then my phone buzzed. Carol. "Julian just filed a counter-motion, kidnapping and breaking and entering. Judge hears it first thing tomorrow, before anything else. Be there at 7. I looked at Chloe, sleeping in my arms. I looked at Linda's photograph. "All right, Linda," I said quietly. "Let's go finish it." 8 months of preparation came down to a Monday morning in Dallas District Court Courtroom 7, where the air conditioning ran too cold and the wooden benches smelled like decades of other people's worst days. I wore the only dress shirt I owned. Carol stood beside me in a charcoal blazer with her leather portfolio and the particular stillness of someone who saves their energy for what matters. Across the aisle, Julian Sterling sat in a navy suit that probably cost $4,000, flanked by 2 attorneys from a Houston firm, whose hourly rate I did not want to know. Eleanor was behind him in the gallery, pearl earrings, silk blouse posture like a blade. She looked at me when I walked in. I looked back. Neither of us looked away. First, we just ran out of time when the bailiff called the room to order. The counter motion came first. Julian's lead attorney, polished, precise, the kind of man who treated courtrooms like performance venues, argued that I had entered a private residence without invitation, removed a minor child without legal authority, and through a pattern of manipulation, had orchestrated a fabricated abuse narrative to destroy his client's marriage and reputation. I watched the judge's face while he talked. She was 60-something, gray hair, cut short reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She listened without expression, which told me nothing, which was probably the point. Carol stood and addressed the counter-motion cleanly. The 911 call timestamp established I had contacted law enforcement before entering the property. The mandatory reporting obligation under Texas Family Code, Section 261.301, provided legal basis for my actions. Dr. Park's medical report, filed independently by a board-certified physician, with no connection to our family, documented 14 months of physical harm. The counter-motion, Carol said, was a procedural distraction designed to consume court time, not address the evidence. The judge overruled the counter-motion in 12 minutes. Julian's attorney did not react. He simply pivoted and moved to their main presentation with the smooth efficiency of someone who had expected that outcome and had already moved on to the next play. The clip appeared on the courtroom monitor at 10:47. It showed me entering the courtyard, but the angle was wrong, compressed in a way the original camera geometry would not produce. It showed Grace stumbling, not being shoved, just stumbling, and it showed me grabbing the arm of a security guard in a way that, isolated from everything before and after, looked like aggression rather than response. Murmuring in the gallery, one of the jurors leaned forward. Julian's attorney said the footage demonstrated that the altercation at the property had been provoked and mischaracterized, that the Sterlings had been victims of an unlawful intrusion, and that the so-called evidence of abuse had been staged for the benefit of a bitter, controlling grandfather who had never accepted his daughter's marriage. I gripped the edge of the table. Carol put her hand briefly on my arm, not comfort instruction. I let go. She stood. Your Honor, the defense requests 48 hours to conduct forensic analysis of the submitted video file before responding. We have reason to believe the footage has been digitally altered. Julian's attorney objected immediately. The judge looked at Carol over her reading glasses. On what basis do you believe the footage has been altered, Counselor? Technical analysis of the file's metadata, Carol said, which we will present in full tomorrow if the court grants the continuance. The judge granted it. Court adjourned for the day at 11:15. Outside on the courthouse steps, Julian stopped in front of a cluster of television cameras and delivered 3 sentences about justice, privacy, and the courage it took to defend one's family against false allegations. He looked calm. He looked credible. He looked like a man who was winning. I watched from the top of the steps and felt the specific cold weight of a day that had not gone wrong exactly, but had not gone right, either the feeling of being a step behind in something, where being a step behind has consequences. Carol appeared at my shoulder. Tomorrow, she said quietly, we take it apart. I nodded. My backup phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I read the text. Mr. Miller, this is Vivian Vance. Rosa gave me your number. I need to speak with you tonight. Not about Julian, about what Julian has planned for me. I think you should know before tomorrow. I read it twice. Then I looked across the plaza to where Julian was still talking to the cameras, smooth and certain, and I thought about what Rosa had heard in the parking garage 2 days before everything fell apart. I typed back 3 words, where and when. Before I tell you what happened in that courtroom the following morning, I need to tell you what happened the night after I left the courthouse. Steps the night Vivian Vance's message came through on my phone. I met her at a coffee shop on Elm Street that stayed open until midnight. She arrived 7 minutes late, sat down across from me without taking off her coat, and looked at me with the eyes of someone who had spent the past 8 months recalculating something, and had finally arrived at an answer she did not like. I set 3 documents on the table between us. Internal Sterling Group emails, obtained through discovery, in which Julian's personal attorney outlined a legal strategy that positioned Vivian as the sole architect of the forged financial instruments, a subordinate who had acted without authorization, without Julian's knowledge, entirely on her own initiative. Vivian read them. She read them twice. Her hands, I noticed, were very still on the table, the stillness of someone absorbing a shock they had been halfway expecting and were still not ready for. He was going to let me take everything, she said. He was always going to, I said. You were never his partner. You were his contingency plan. She looked at the documents for a long moment. Then she looked at me. What do you need? Tomorrow, I said. In that courtroom, everything you have. She reached into her bag and set a flash drive on the table between us. Everything is on there, she said. 8 months of internal communications, financial records, meeting minutes. She paused. And the email where Eleanor asked her contact at the city transportation office to suppress the camera footage, with his name on it. I picked up the flash drive. You'll need to speak with Carol Simmons tonight, I said. She'll arrange the terms with the DA's office. Vivian nodded. She stood to leave, then stopped. Mr. Miller. She did not look at me when she said it. I knew what was happening to Grace. I was in that house. A pause. I told myself it wasn't my business. I did not say anything to that. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be said out loud once so the person saying them has to hear it in their own voice. She left without looking back. Before the session opened, Carol told me that Holloway's digital forensics unit had been working through the night. Their analyst, a man named Daniel Fries, 16 years with Dallas PD, took the stand at 9:47. I sat beside Carol and listened. Fries laid it out the way I would explain a failed engine to a customer, plain direct, no wasted words. Every video file carries a fingerprint. He said metadata embedded in the file itself, recording when it was created, what device captured it, what software last processed it. It is the equivalent of a VIN number on an engine block. You can repaint the car any color you want. The VIN does not change. The clip Julian's attorneys had submitted showed inconsistencies in 3 separate metadata fields: creation timestamp, encoding software signature, and frame rate consistency markers. The original Sterling security system used a specific proprietary encoder. The submitted clip had been processed through a different application entirely, one commonly used for video editing. 17 frames in the critical sequence showed pixel-level artifacts consistent with content replacement. Julian's attorney objected 4 times. The judge overruled all 4. Freeze stepped down. Detective Holloway followed. He confirmed the unit's findings in 2 sentences, without elaboration, which was more effective than 10 minutes of explanation would have been. The judge looked at Julian's lead attorney over her reading glasses. "Counselor, your submitted exhibit appears to have been materially altered. I'm admitting it into evidence as Exhibit 31, not in support of your client's position, but as evidence of potential tampering with court proceedings." She made a note. "We'll address the implications of that finding separately." Julian's attorney requested a recess. During the recess, I sat beside Carol in the hallway and drank bad vending machine coffee and did not say anything because there was nothing to say yet. We were not done, not even close. When we filed back into the courtroom, I noticed immediately that the gallery had shifted. One seat near the back, which had been occupied by a woman in a dark blazer all morning, was now empty. Then I heard the doors at the side of the courtroom open. Vivian Vance walked in, spoke briefly to the clerk, and placed a sealed envelope on the prosecution's table. Then she turned and looked directly at Julian Sterling. Julian's face did something I had not seen it do in all the months of this. It went uncertain. Not afraid yet, but uncertain. The first crack in something that had held itself together through everything else. The judge looked up. "Ms. Vance," she said, "I understand you wish to address the court." "Yes, Your Honor," Vivian said. Her voice was steady. "I do." The courtroom did not make a sound. Not the shuffle of papers, not the creak of a bench, not a cough or a whisper from the gallery. Vivian Vance stood before the judge with her hands clasped in front of her and her chin level, and the particular composure of someone who has made a very difficult decision and has decided that the only way through it is straight ahead. Julian's lead attorney was on his feet before she said a word. "Your Honor, this witness has not been disclosed by the prosecution. Ms. Vance approached the DA's office last evening," the prosecutor said, rising smoothly. "A cooperation agreement was executed at 11:45 p.m. She is appearing as a state's witness under that agreement." The judge looked at both of them over her reading glasses. "Sit down, Counselor," but she said to Julian's attorney. He sat. Vivian took the stand. She stated her name, her title, her length of employment at Sterling Group. Her voice did not shake. Her hands folded on the railing of the witness box were steady. I had the distinct impression that whatever fear she felt, she had decided before she walked through that door, that the fear was not going to be visible. Some people fall apart under pressure. Others go very still the way a structure does when it has found its load-bearing point. "Ms. Vance," the prosecutor said, "can you describe your role in the preparation of the financial documents at the center of this case?" "I prepared them," Vivian said. "I forged Grace Miller's signature on all 17 instruments. I created the shell company documentation. I routed the loan applications through Meridian Capital Advisors, LLC, on Julian Sterling's direct instruction." She paused. "I have emails, meeting recordings, and handwritten notes documenting every instruction I received. They are in the envelope I submitted to this court." Julian's attorney shot to his feet. Julian himself gripped the edge of the defense table with both hands, his knuckles going white, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked like exactly what he was. A man watching something he had built very carefully come apart in real time. "The court will note the defendant's reaction," Carol said quietly beside me. The prosecutor produced the flash drive contents on the courtroom monitor, walking Vivian through email after email, Julian's instructions, Julian's timeline, Julian's explicit direction. That if investigators came, Vivian would handle all communication with legal authorities, and that her employment contract included an indemnification clause that she now understood had been written specifically to be unenforceable. "He told you that clause protected you?" the prosecutor asked. "He told me that several times," Vivian said. "I believed him. I should not have. Then the prosecutor brought up the second category of documents. The communications between Eleanor Sterling and a mid-level administrator in the Dallas City Transportation Office, spanning 4 exchanges over 2 days, culminating in a message sent at 6:47 a.m. on the morning of the incident at the Sterling property, asking that traffic camera footage from a 2-block radius around the Highland Park address not be retained for that calendar day. The administrator's name was in the emails. His personal cell phone number was in the emails. His response, a single word handled, was in the emails. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, the state is filing additional charges against Eleanor Sterling for bribery of a public official under federal statute and obstruction of justice. We are requesting that an arrest warrant be issued tonight for execution tomorrow morning, the judge made a note. The request is granted. I looked at Eleanor. She was sitting very straight in the gallery, the way she always sat, pearl earrings and silk blouse, and the posture of a woman who had never once in her life been caught. But her hands were in her lap now, and I could see from where I sat that they were not still. They were working against each other, one thumb pressing hard into the palm of the other hand, over and over, the private physical tell of a woman whose exterior had not yet broken, but whose interior was doing something very different. Then she turned and looked at Julian. I had been watching Eleanor Sterling for 8 months. I had watched her in depositions and pre-trial hearings in the hallway outside this courtroom, where she carried herself like someone who owned the building and was simply allowing the rest of us to use it temporarily. In all of that time, I had never seen her look at Julian with anything other than the proprietary confidence of a woman surveying her most important asset. The look she gave him now was not that. It was the look of a woman who had just understood fully and finally that the asset had failed and that she was going to pay for it. Julian did not look back at her. He was staring at the table. Carol leaned close to me and said very quietly, "Tomorrow." I nodded. Outside the tall courthouse windows, the Dallas afternoon was bright and indifferent. Somewhere in the city, an arrest warrant was being written with Eleanor Sterling's name on it. Somewhere, the administrator who had sent one word handled was about to have a very different kind of day than he had planned. And in the witness box, Vivian Vance unclasped her hands, set them flat on the railing, and waited for the next question with the steady, forward-facing attention of a woman who had made her choice and was going to see it through. I did not feel sorry for her, but I respected that at the end she had chosen the harder thing. Rosa Delgado took the stand at 9:22 in the morning, wearing a blue blouse she had clearly pressed carefully the night before, and she sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the prosecutor with the steady, quiet attention of someone who had decided to stop being afraid and was discovering minute by minute what that felt like. She testified for 41 minutes. She described what she had seen in the Sterling house over 3 years, with the precise, unhurried detail of a person who had stored everything carefully, because some part of her had always known that someday someone would need to hear it. The broken glass, the gray uniform, the storage room with the lock on the outside. The way Grace moved through that house in the last year, smaller and smaller, like something that had been gradually compressed until it barely took up space at all. Julian's attorney cross-examined her, hard attacking her immigration status, her motivations, her memory. Carol objected to the immigration line of questioning immediately. The judge sustained it. Rosa answered every other question in the same level. Voice not faster when she was challenged, and not slower when she was not. When she stepped down, her hands were shaking, not from fear, I thought, but from the release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. She walked past the defense table without looking at it, and took her seat in the gallery and laced her fingers together in her lap and breathed. The prosecutor then submitted Dr. Park's complete medical report, the forensic document analysis confirming the forged signatures, and the independent authentication of the environmental audio recordings from the wooden car. Carol stood. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor." The judge looked at Julian's lead attorney. He leaned over and spoke quietly to Julian for 30 seconds. Then he straightened. "Your Honor, the defense requests a brief recess to consult with our client regarding the possibility of a plea agreement." The judge's expression did not change. "You have 30 minutes, counselor." During the recess, I sat in the hallway with Grace and Chloe. Chloe had fallen asleep against Grace's shoulder, the red wooden car held loosely in her hands. Grace was looking at the far wall and turning her mother's ring, the one I had given her from Linda's jewelry box 6 months ago, around and around on her right hand. "Whatever happens in the next hour," I said, You are already free, Grace. That happened months ago. The rest is just paperwork. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. I know, she said. I just want it to be over. It will be, I said. Today. The recess ended. Julian had not taken the plea. We filed back in. The judge had barely settled when the side door opened and 2 Dallas PD officers in plain clothes walked into the courtroom. They moved with the deliberate, unhurried purpose of people executing something that has already been decided. They walked directly to the row where Eleanor Sterling sat. The room understood before anyone said anything. Eleanor looked up at them. For one fraction of a second, something moved across her face that I had never seen there before. Not fear exactly, but the specific shock of a person who has lived their entire life in a world where certain consequences apply to other people and have just discovered too late that the world does not actually work that way. Eleanor Sterling. The first officer said, "You are under arrest for continuous violence against the family under Texas Penal Code 25.11, bribery of a public official, obstruction of justice, and falsification of medical records." Eleanor stood. She straightened her jacket. She looked around the courtroom, at the gallery, at the press section, at Julian's back, at the judge. And then she said loudly enough for every person in the room to hear, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what this family has built in this city? You cannot do this to me. You cannot." The handcuffs went on. Eleanor Sterling in her pearl earrings and her silk blouse, and 40 years of accumulated certainty that rooms like this one, were places where things happen to other people, was walked toward the side door of courtroom 7, while the sentence she had started went unfinished in the air behind her. Grace, sitting in the gallery, watched her go. The expression on my daughter's face was not triumph. It was not relief, not yet. It was something quieter and more fundamental. The expression of a person watching the thing that broke them finally break itself. Her shoulder under my hand was soft, not tense. For the first time in as long as I could remember. Somewhere in the gallery, someone began to clap. Then another person. The judge raised her gavel but did not bring it down immediately. She gave it 3 seconds, maybe 4, before restoring order. And I have always thought those 3 or 4 seconds were the most honest thing I saw in that courtroom. When the room quieted, the judge looked at Julian. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "I strongly advise you to speak with your counsel before tomorrow morning." Julian stared at the table. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Julian did not move. Julian Sterling did not take the plea. His attorney informed the court at 8:53 in the morning. The judge acknowledged it without visible reaction, arranged her papers, and the final session of the trial of State of Texas versus Julian Daniel Sterling began with the particular quiet of something that has been a long time coming and has finally arrived. I sat beside Carol at the prosecution's table. Grace was in the gallery directly behind us, Chloe on her lap, the red wooden car in Chloe's hands. I did not turn around to look at them. I did not need to. I could feel them there the way you feel warmth from a fire you are not facing. The jury had deliberated for 9 hours over the previous 2 days. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s, a retired school teacher from Plano, stood when the judge asked for the verdict and read from the paper in her hands in a voice that was steady and clear and left no room for interpretation. On the charge of wire fraud, which the federal court had addressed in a separate proceeding the previous month, and on which Julian had already been found guilty, the state charges before us today were the following. On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial fraud under Texas state law, guilty. On the charge of continuous family violence under Texas Penal Code 25.11, guilty. On the charge of tampering with evidence submitted to a court of law, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to misappropriate property through fraudulent means, guilty. Each word landed in the courtroom like something solid being set down on a hard surface. Between each verdict, there was a silence that the room held collectively, the way people hold their breath at the top of something before it begins to fall. Julian sat very still through all of it. His hands were flat on the table. His face had gone to a place I did not recognize, not the composed surface he had maintained for 2 years, not the brittle anger that had cracked through it in that courtyard 8 months ago, but something emptier than either, the face of a man who had been so certain for so long that certainty itself had become the thing that failed him. The judge sentenced him on each count separately. Then she looked up from her papers. On the combined charges, this court sentences Julian Daniel Sterling on each state charge as follows: 10 years for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, 10 years for continuous family violence under Texas Penal Code, Section 25.112 years. For tampering with evidence to be served, concurrent. 5 years for conspiracy to misappropriate property, to be served concurrent all state sentences, to run consecutively to the federal wire, fraud conviction handed down in the prior proceeding. Total effective term, 22 years. The court further orders the immediate civil forfeiture of Sterling Group assets to satisfy judgments related to the fraudulent financial instruments, and refers the matter of restitution to Grace Miller to the Civil Division for determination of damages. She set her pen down. The mineral rights parcel in Pecos County, Texas, recorded under the name of Linda Marie Miller and subsequently transferred to Vantage Land Holdings, LLC under instruments this court has determined to be fraudulent, is hereby restored to its rightful owner, Grace Ann Miller, with full legal effect as of today's date. Grace made a sound behind me. Not a word, not a name. Just a sound small and broken and whole, at the same time the sound of something that has been held underwater for a very long time, finally being allowed to surface. 2 officers approached Julian. He stood when they asked him to. He did not speak. He did not look at the gallery, did not look for Eleanor, did not look at me. He walked toward the side door of the courtroom with the officers on either side of him, and just before he reached the door, he stopped for 1/2 second, not turning around, just stopping. And then he went through, and the door closed behind him, and he was gone. A week later, Eleanor Sterling entered a guilty plea on all charges. Her attorneys had negotiated reduced terms in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. Even reduced the sentence was substantial. She left the courthouse in Dallas on a Thursday afternoon, and according to the newspaper, flew to her sister's home in Connecticut that same evening. I did not read further than that. I felt Grace's hand on my shoulder before I heard her move. She came around the end of the table, and she stood in front of me, and for a moment, she just looked at me. My daughter, 34 years old, standing in a courtroom in Dallas with her mother's ring on her hand and something in her eyes I had not seen in longer than I could measure. She did not say anything. She put her arms around me and pressed her face into my shoulder and held on, and I held her back, and I felt her shoulders shaking, and I felt my own chest doing something complicated that I did not try to name. Then a small determined force hit us both from the side at approximately knee height. "I want to hug too," Chloe announced, wedging herself between us with the absolute conviction of a 5-year-old who has decided that a moment belongs to her as much as it belongs to anyone else. Grace laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her, and bent down and scooped Chloe up. And we stood there, the 3 of us, in the middle of courtroom 7 in Dallas District Court, holding on. After a moment, I reached into the inside pocket of my denim jacket. I did not take the photograph out. I just put my hand over it, feeling the edges of it through the fabric, the familiar rectangle of it, the weight of it, that had nothing to do with the paper it was printed on. All right, Linda, I thought, we did it. Carol appeared at my elbow, her leather portfolio under her arm, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at the 3 of us, and she smiled the full, unguarded smile of someone who does this work because they believe in it and occasionally get to see why. "Come on," she said. "I know a place that makes excellent coffee. I think we've all earned it. A year changes things in ways you do not fully notice until one ordinary morning you are standing in a small kitchen that smells like butter and cinnamon and brown sugar, and you realize that ordinary is exactly what you have been working toward all along." The sign above the door read, "Linda's Apple Pie," in hand-painted letters, blue on cream, the kind of sign that looks like it has always been there, even when it hasn't. Grace had painted it herself on a Saturday in March, standing on a stepladder in the parking lot, with Chloe handing her brushes from below and offering opinions she had not been asked for. I had sat on the tailgate of the F-150 and watched and not said a word, because some things are not improved by commentary. I arrived at the shop at 6:30, same as every morning. The back door was already unlocked, which meant Grace had been there since before 5, same as every morning. The kitchen was warm and bright and full of the particular organized chaos of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and is doing several things at once. 2 pies on the cooling rack, a 3rd coming out of the oven, a pot of coffee already made and waiting. Grace looked up when I came in. She had flour on her forearm and a streak of it in her hair, and she looked more like herself than she had looked in years. More like the girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter and sing off key to the radio. More like Linda. "You're 4 minutes early," she said. "Truck was running well," I said. She handed me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted one, because after 65 years, I have never not wanted coffee at 6:30 in the morning, and Grace knows that. I leaned against the counter and drank it and watched her work and did not say anything else because some mornings, the quiet between two people who have been through something together is its own kind of conversation. Chloe appeared at 7:15 in her school clothes, navy blue pants, a yellow shirt, her hair in 2 braids that Grace had clearly fought for, and one carrying the red wooden car in one hand, and her backpack in the other. She set both on the kitchen table, climbed into a chair, and looked at her mother expectantly. "Breakfast first," Grace said without turning around. "I know," Chloe said in the tone of a 6-year-old who has heard this before. I finished my coffee, put on my denim jacket, the old one faded blue soft, from years of washing the one I had laid across Grace's shoulders in a courtyard in Highland Park, on a July afternoon that felt from here like something that had happened to different people in a different world. In a way it had, in a way it hadn't. The jacket was the same, the people inside it were not. I picked up the bakery box Grace had packed for Chloe's class, 12 small apple tarts, a Friday tradition she had started in September, and looked at my daughter. "We'll be back by 3, I said. Grace turned from the oven. There was something in her face that she did not put into words. She rarely did. She was Linda's daughter that way, but I had been reading that face for 34 years, and I knew what it was. It was the look of someone who has been given back something they thought was gone permanently, and who is still even now a little surprised each morning to find it still there. "Drive safe," she said. "Always do," I said. The drive to Chloe's school took 11 minutes in the morning traffic down through the neighborhood of small houses and old trees that Grace had chosen deliberately for its distance from Highland Park and its similarity to the town where she had grown up. Chloe sat in the back seat and told me at considerable length about a disagreement she was having with a boy named Marcus in her class, about whether or not a wooden car could beat a metal car in a race. "He says metal is stronger," she said. "But I said it depends on what you're using it for. Grandpa, am I right?" "You're right," I said. "Metal is stronger, but strength isn't always the point." She considered that. "Is that why you made mine out of wood?" I looked at her in the rearview mirror. 6 years old, dark eyes, 2 braids, holding the little red car in her lap, with the easy familiarity of something she had carried so long it had become part of her. "That's part of it," I said. She seemed satisfied with that, and moved on to telling me about a book her teacher was reading to the class, something about a girl who lived on a farm and had a pig for a best friend, and I listened the way I always listened to Chloe, fully, because she was always worth listening to. At school, she climbed down from the truck, accepted the bakery box carefully in both arms, and walked toward the entrance. At the door, she stopped and turned around the way she always did to make sure I was still there. I was still there. She went inside. I leaned back against the driver's door of the F-150 with my coffee, the second cup, the one I brought in a travel mug for the drive, and watched the school the way I watched it every morning until I was sure the day had gotten started and everyone was where they were supposed to be. The Texas morning was opening up around me the way Texas mornings do, wide and unhurried, the light coming in low and gold across the rooftops. The air still cool enough to feel like a promise before the heat arrived. Grace told me later what happened inside that classroom. Chloe's teacher had begun the morning the way she always did, asking each child in turn about something that mattered to them. "Who is your superhero?" she asked. The other children named characters from movies, from books, from television. Chloe set the red wooden car carefully on the corner of her desk, stood up and pointed out the window at the parking lot where the old F-150 sat. "That's my superhero," she said. "My grandpa Arthur, because he has a magic wooden car, and he never ever let Mommy bow her head to anyone." Grace heard it from the teacher at pickup that afternoon and called me while I was still in the shop, washing flour off my hands. She could not get all the words out in one piece. I did not mind. I understood every one of them anyway. I finished my coffee, looked up at the sky, slipped my hand into the inside pocket of my jacket, and felt the edge of the photograph, Linda, at 42, laughing in the Pecos County sun, at something I could not remember anymore. I did not take it out. I just kept my hand there for a moment, the way you keep your hand on something you are grateful for. Then I got back in the truck, started the engine, the old growl of it reliable as ever, and drove back toward the small shop on the corner where the sign read, Linda's apple pie, and my daughter was making something good out of what was left. James Whitfield called that evening the way he always did when he had been praying about something and needed to know the answer. I told him it was over. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Linda would be proud of you, Arthur." I told him I hoped so. We stayed on the line without talking for a little while. After that, the way old friends can. I have told you this story because I lived it and because I almost did not see it in time. If there is one thing this family story taught me, it is this: silence is not the same as peace. I stayed quiet when my gut told me to ask harder questions. I trusted appearances when I should have trusted what I felt. Do not make my mistake. If someone you love goes quiet, if their voice changes, if the calls stop coming, drive the 4 hours. Show up. Ask the questions that are uncomfortable to ask. I believe God puts the right moments in front of us. That afternoon, he put nearly 6 now at the top of a staircase. The rest was just a grandfather who finally showed up when it mattered. Family betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it walks through the front door in a $4,000 suit and says all the right things. This family story is proof that the truth survives not because it is loud, but because children have not yet learned to bury it. If this family story moved you, if you have ever witnessed family betrayal, or know someone who has, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that truth and love are always worth fighting for, subscribe to this channel. We tell these stories because they matter. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely with the hope that they might teach us something true. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds your heart.